I wouldn't say I'm a petty guy by nature, but I do have a long memory when it comes to people disrespecting my wife. This whole thing started a couple of years ago at her friend's wedding. And when I say wedding, I don't mean a simple ceremony followed by a reception. No, this was more like a 3-day marathon of events, each one with its own theme, dress code, and expectation that you'd show up fully energized and ready to celebrate like it was the biggest moment of your life. For us, it wasn't. Don't get me wrong, we were happy for her friend. Of course we were. But my wife and I aren't big party people. We're the type who enjoy a quiet dinner, maybe a movie, and being home at a reasonable hour. So when the wedding schedule came out, we were already a little overwhelmed just reading it. Day 1 kicked off with a dinner at 9 p.m. 9. At night. On a weekday. We still went because that's what you do. You show up, you smile, you support your friends. We got dressed up, drove over, and settled in for what we thought would be a nice meal. Except it wasn't just a meal. It stretched into a 3-hour event. Courses kept coming, speeches dragged on, and by the time dessert rolled around, we were already checking the time and silently agreeing we were done for the night. But apparently, the night wasn't done with us. At the end of the dinner, the bride announced that everyone would be heading out dancing, like not optional dancing, the kind where you're expected to go, stay, and keep the energy high. We politely declined. We had work the next morning, and honestly, we were exhausted. We told her we had a great time, congratulated her again, and headed home. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The next day, we showed up to the brunch event. Yes, another one, and almost immediately the bride starts talking about how amazing the dancing was. She's going on and on about it. "You guys missed out," she said, smiling but with this edge to her voice. "Even the older guests stayed. And the kids. Everyone was out there dancing." I just smiled and nodded. What was I supposed to say? Good for them. We weren't there. Move on. But that little comment stuck in my head, not because it was a big deal, but because of the way she said it, like we had failed some kind of test. Still, I let it go. At that point, we were only halfway through this wedding experience. That same day, there were 2 separate ceremonies. 2. Each with different outfits, different vibes, and different expectations. My wife handled it like a champ, even though I could tell she was getting tired. She kept redoing her hair, fixing her makeup, changing dresses, doing everything she could to show up and be supportive. By the end of day 2, we were completely drained. But there was still one more event left, the final brunch on day 3. That morning, I remember waking up early and just staring at the ceiling for a second, thinking, we're really doing this again? My wife was already up, getting ready. She had her 4th outfit laid out, her makeup spread across the counter, and she was carefully getting herself together one more time. And I'll be honest, she looked great. She always does. But more than that, she looked like someone who had put in real effort, someone who cared enough to keep showing up even when she was tired. We got dressed, drove over, and walked into that final brunch thinking, okay, let's just get through this and we're done. That's when it happened. Her friend, the bride, walked up to greet us. Big smile, arms open, acting like everything was perfect. She looked at my wife, paused for just a second, and said, "Oh, hi, babe. Wow, you look comfy." Now, on the surface, that might sound harmless, but it wasn't. It was the tone, that slightly drawn-out comfy, like it was code for something else, like she was pointing out that my wife wasn't dressed up enough, like she hadn't tried hard enough, which was complete nonsense. My wife had spent 3 days showing up, dressing up, and doing everything she could to be there for her, and that's the comment she gets? I saw it hit her. Just for a second. She smiled, of course, because that's who she is. She brushed it off, laughed a little, and kept the conversation moving. Later, when we were alone, she told me it was probably just stress, that weddings can make people act weird, that her friend didn't mean anything by it. Maybe she believed that. I didn't. Because to me, that moment said everything. It wasn't just the comment, it was the pattern, the little digs, the expectations, the subtle judgments over those 3 days. And right then, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to start a fight. I wasn't going to confront her. But I also wasn't going to forget. If she wanted to play that game, I could play it too. Just a little differently, and a lot more patiently. I didn't say anything to my wife about what I was planning. Honestly, I don't even think I fully planned it at first. It was more like the idea just sat there in the back of my mind, waiting for the right moment to show up. And it did. A few weeks after the wedding, we ran into her friend again at a small get-together. Nothing fancy this time, just a casual evening with a few people, drinks, snacks, normal conversation. The kind of thing my wife and I actually enjoy. I remember watching her when we walked in. Same energy as always. Confident, a little loud, very aware of herself. The kind of person who fills a room, whether you want them to or not. She greeted my wife first with a hug, acting like everything was perfectly normal. No mention of the wedding, no acknowledgement of anything that might have felt off. Just smooth, effortless charm. Then she turned to me. "Hey, good to see you," she said, smiling. And that's when it happened. I smiled back and said in the most genuine tone I could manage, "I've always liked how you don't stress about appearances. You just go with that natural look. It's kind of refreshing." There was a pause. Just a small one, but I caught it. Her smile stayed, but her eyes shifted slightly, like she was trying to process what I'd just said. Was it a compliment? Was it not? She laughed a little. Thanks?" And I just nodded, like I meant every word. That was it. No follow-up, no smirk, nothing that could give it away. Inside, though, I knew exactly what I was doing. From that point on, it became a habit. Not constant, not obvious, just occasional little comments dropped into conversation like they didn't mean anything at all. A few weeks later, another gathering. She walked in a bit late, nothing crazy, maybe 20 minutes, but enough for people to notice. At some point during the night, while everyone was chatting, I said, "I wish I could be as relaxed as you with timing. I always feel like I have to show up right on time for everything." Again, same thing. That tiny pause, that quick mental check. Is he complimenting me or calling me out? She gave a small smile. "Yeah, I guess I'm just not as strict about it." I nodded. "It's a good attitude to have." And then I moved on like nothing happened. That was the key. I never pushed it too far, never made it obvious, never said anything that could clearly be called rude. Every single comment lived in that gray area. Technically nice, but just sharp enough to land if you thought about it for a second too long. Over time, I started to notice something. She was paying more attention to me. Not in a friendly way, but in a cautious way. Like she was trying to figure me out. There was one night in particular that really stood out. We were at a dinner party, and she showed up in this outfit that was definitely more dressed down than usual. Not bad, just simpler than what she normally went for. At one point, I looked over and said, "Wow, you look really comfortable tonight. That's honestly the best way to do these things." My wife shot me a quick glance. Not a full reaction, just enough to say, "I see what you're doing." But she didn't say anything. Her friend, though, same reaction as always. A slight delay, a smile that didn't fully settle. "Thanks," she said, dragging the word just a little, and I could practically see the gears turning. That became my favorite part. Not the comments themselves, but the moment right after. That split second where she had to decide how to take it, where she couldn't quite tell if she'd been complimented or subtly insulted, because that's exactly what she had done to my wife. The difference was, I wasn't doing it out of stress. I wasn't overwhelmed or caught up in some big event. I was calm, deliberate, patient, and I had all the time in the world. Months went by like this. Then a year. It became this quiet, unspoken thing between us. She never called me out, because she couldn't. There was nothing concrete to point to. If she ever tried, it would sound ridiculous. What, he said I look comfortable? He said I have a relaxed attitude? That I don't worry about appearances? None of it sounds bad when you say it out loud. But she knew. Or at least she suspected. And I could tell it was getting to her. She started showing up more put together to events, more on time, a little more careful, like she was trying to avoid giving me any kind of opening.
which in a way made it even better, because now she was thinking about it, just like I had thought about that one word, comfy. My wife, on the other hand, mostly stayed out of it. One night after we got home from a party, she looked at me and said, "You're kind of messing with her, aren't you?" I didn't even try to deny it. I just shrugged. "A little." She sighed, but there was a hint of a smile there. "You know I meant it when I said it probably wasn't a big deal, right?" "I know," I said, "but it was still a crappy thing to say." She didn't argue with that. And that was enough for me. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about starting drama or creating problems. It was about balance, about making sure that people who throw those little cutting comments into the world eventually feel what that's like. Not in a loud way, not in a destructive way, just quietly, consistently, over time. And I wasn't done yet.
By the time the second year rolled around, this whole thing had turned into something almost routine. Not in an obsessive way. I wasn't sitting around planning lines or waiting for the perfect moment like some kind of villain in a movie. It was more natural than that. If the opportunity came up, I'd take it. Maybe it didn't. I'll let it go. That was the beauty of it. It never felt forced. And because of that, it never looked intentional either. But the effects? Those were definitely building. At first, it was just those small pauses she'd have after I said something, that little flicker of confusion. But over time, it started to change into something else. Awareness. She became more careful, not just around me, but in general. I noticed it in the way she carried herself at gatherings. Before, she had this effortless confidence, like she didn't have to think twice about anything she said or did. Now, there was just a hint of hesitation. Nothing obvious. Most people probably wouldn't even pick up on it. But I did, because I knew exactly where it was coming from. There was one night that really made everything click. We were at a friend's birthday dinner. Nothing fancy, just a long table, good food, people talking over each other, the usual chaos. My wife and I were sitting across from her. At some point, she started telling a story about being late to an event, laughing about it, making it sound like no big deal. A year ago, she would have owned that completely. This time, she glanced at me, just for a second. Quick, almost unnoticeable. But it was there. And I had to fight the urge to smile. When there was a natural pause in the conversation, I said, casually, "I mean, honestly, I kind of admire that. Not stressing about being on time. Just showing up when you show up. I wish I could be that relaxed." The table chuckled a bit. It sounded like a harmless comment. But she didn't laugh right away. She gave that same tight smile I'd seen before, then nodded. "Yeah, I guess it depends on the situation." That was new. Before, she would have doubled down, made a joke, owned it. Now, she was adjusting. And that's when I realized something important. This wasn't just about those comments anymore. It had changed her behavior. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make a big scene or anything like that, but enough that she was thinking twice, enough that she was more aware of how she came across, enough that she felt it. The same way my wife had felt it at that brunch. And look, I'm not going to pretend this turned into some big moral victory. There was no dramatic confrontation, no moment where she pulled me aside and said, "Okay, what's your deal?" That never happened. Because it couldn't. Everything I said was technically nice. That was the whole point. If anything, from the outside, I probably looked like I was giving her compliments, being supportive, easygoing. And that's what made it work. Because the real message was never in the words. It was in the tone, the timing, the history behind it. There were even moments where I almost dropped it entirely. Times when things felt normal, when she was being perfectly pleasant, when it seemed like maybe I was holding on to something that didn't matter anymore. But then I'd remember that morning. My wife standing there after putting in all that effort, and that one word, comfy,
said like it meant something else. And just like that, I'd remind myself why I started. Not out of anger, not even out of revenge, really. Just principle. You don't get to casually take shots at people and then walk through life like it doesn't count. Sometimes those little comments stick. Sometimes they matter more than the big ones. And sometimes the only way to deal with it is to give that energy back. Not louder, not harsher, just smarter. These days, things are mostly neutral between us. We see each other at events, we talk, we laugh, everything looks normal, and for the most part it is. But every now and then, I'll still drop one. Just a small one. Just enough. The other night, she showed up to a dinner in a pretty simple outfit, nice but low-key compared to what she used to wear. I smiled and said, "You always know how to keep things easy. I respect that." She paused. Of course she did. Then she smiled back. "I try." And that was it. No tension, no awkwardness, just that tiny moment where she had to think about it. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted. Not to hurt her, not to embarrass her, just to make sure she understood, on some level, what those kinds of comments feel like when you're on the receiving end. Will I keep doing it forever? Probably not. At some point, it'll just fade out. People drift, friendships change, life moves on. But until then, I'm in no rush. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that you don't need big gestures to make a point. Sometimes, the quietest ones last the longest.